Okay, so when those infamous Epstein files were finally unsealed, the whole world was basically holding its breath, waiting for a bombshell to drop on one name in particular, Donald Trump. But what if the official Department of Justice documents, what if they told a completely different story? Today, we're diving into what the files actually say. Right. The expectation was simple. Find that smoking gun, that one piece of evidence that would finally tie Trump to Epstein's horrific crimes. But as investigators and journalists started combing through thousands and thousands of pages of official records, we're talking FBI interviews, internal communications, the whole 9 yards, the picture that emerged wasn't one of complicity. Nope, it was something else entirely.
Instead of complicity, the files actually document a pattern that stands in really sharp contrast to so many others in Epstein's orbit. We're talking about a clean break, a permanent ban from his properties, and this is the part that's really surprising, direct cooperation with law enforcement.
Okay, so let's get right to the most direct piece of evidence. It comes from an FBI interview with the former police chief of Palm Beach, Michael Reiter, and he talks about a phone call that honestly is central to understanding Trump's real role in this whole saga. Now, to really get the weight of this call, you've got to remember the context. This is 2006. Jeffrey Epstein hasn't been convicted of anything yet. He is still an incredibly powerful, incredibly wealthy, and super well-connected guy in Palm Beach society. He seemed untouchable. And it's right at that moment that the local police chief's phone rings. That quote? That's straight from the official FBI summary of the interview. This wasn't a call to defend a friend or an associate. It was a call to encourage the police. Trump was essentially using his influence to validate the investigation, signaling to law enforcement that, hey, you've got support from inside these elite circles. And this is so significant because it directly violates that unspoken code of the elite, omerta. You know, that rule of silence, where you protect your own. By picking up the phone and calling the police chief, Trump wasn't just sharing an opinion. He was breaking ranks. He was breaking the code. So the impact of that one call was pretty massive. First off, it placed him firmly, undeniably, on the side of the cops. Second, it shattered that elite code of silence we just talked about. Third, it gave investigators a crucial character check on Epstein from someone who was actually in his social circle. And finally, it sent a signal that this investigation had powerful support and wasn't going to be easily swept under the rug. And this cooperation wasn't just limited to words. The documents also lay out a very tangible, very real action, the permanent ban of Jeffrey Epstein from Mar-a-Lago.
The story, as it's laid out in the files, is pretty straightforward. Epstein crossed a major line on Trump's property. He tried to poach a female employee from the spa. When this was reported to Trump, the response wasn't a warning, it wasn't a quiet word, it was a permanent ban. Epstein was out and he was never allowed back in, period.
Now, sure, some critics have argued, oh, this was just a business dispute. But really, regardless of the motive, the documented outcome is what matters here. And that outcome was a protective measure. It severed Epstein's access to the club, to its employees, and to its members, effectively shutting down one of his potential hunting grounds. And this is where the contrast becomes just crystal clear. The files show Trump's separation was total, it was final. There is no evidence of them re-engaging. Meanwhile, those same documents detail flight logs and communications showing other powerful associates continuing their relationships with Epstein long after the allegations were public. But you know, maybe the most compelling evidence isn't even what the files contain, but what's glaringly absent. And this brings us to a classic investigative principle. It's called the dog that didn't bark, a concept from a Sherlock Holmes story. And the idea is actually pretty simple. Sometimes the most important clue is the thing that should be there, but isn't. The absence of something can be just as revealing as its presence. And this is where it gets crazy. This exact phrase shows up in Epstein's own words. In a recovered email, Epstein refers to Trump as the dog that hasn't barked. Now, that is not the language you use for an ally. That suggests Epstein saw Trump not as a friend, but as a threat, as someone who knew too much and couldn't be controlled. So let's break it down. What is present in the files? Okay. Trump's name is in some old contact books from the 90s. But what's absent? Well, his name isn't on any flight logs during the peak years of Epstein's trafficking operation. There's no mention of him in the trafficking scheme itself. And there's zero communication after the ban. In an investigation like this, those absences, they're everything.
So the really crucial point here is how these documented actions, the call, the ban, the total separation,
How do they compare to the behavior of so many other powerful people who are named in these exact same files?
And here's the final breakdown. While others stayed silent, the files document Trump speaking up to the police. While others continued their association, the files document Trump enforcing a permanent ban. And while many others refused to speak to the FBI or invoked their Fifth Amendment rights, the files show Trump corroborating suspicions, effectively siding with law enforcement. The contrast is it's stark. Now, let's be super clear. The DOJ files don't paint a picture of Trump as some kind of proactive crusader who is out there gathering evidence for years. But they do document a series of actions that were a clear outlier. In a sea of complicity and frankly cowardly silence from the elite, his behavior stands in stark, documented contrast.
So the official documents, they reveal this fascinating, really unexpected counter-narrative. They don't paint a picture of a proactive hero, but of something arguably much rarer, an insider who broke the code of silence. And it leaves us with a pretty compelling question. In a room full of powerful people who chose to look away, what does it mean when only one of them picks up the phone and sides with the cops?